She didn't cry at the reading of the will, not because she wasn't grieving, but because what the lawyer said to her made absolutely no sense. While her brothers walked away with the house, the land, the truck, the bank accounts, and 30 years of her father's savings, she got a well, a dry one, valued at $15,000 on paper. Worthless in every way that mattered. Everyone in that room felt sorry for her. Some of them smirked. Her older brother cleared his throat and looked away. And the lawyer simply slid the deed across the table like it was an afterthought. But here's the thing nobody in that room knew. Her father had never done anything by accident in his life, not once. And what she would find at the bottom of that well would rewrite everything she thought she knew about the man who raised her. Her name was Clara Mendenhall, 34 years old, a school librarian in a small town in rural Tennessee, the kind of place where everybody knows your last name and half of them knew your grandfather. She had grown up on her father's property, 42 acres of red clay and cedar trees outside of Cookville, a piece of land her family had worked since before the Civil War. Her father, Raymond Mendenhall, was not a rich man by any measure. He drove the same Ford truck for 22 years. He wore the same pair of boots until they split at the sole. He heated his house in winter with a wood stove he'd built himself, and he grew most of what he ate in a garden behind the main house. But he was meticulous, deliberate. He was the kind of man who kept every receipt, every repair log, every hand-drawn map of the property in a series of green notebooks stacked neatly in the back bedroom. He measured twice. He cut once. He never made a decision without thinking it through to the end. So when Raymond Mendenhall died of a heart attack in March, 2 weeks after his 68th birthday, and his will was read the following Monday, the one thing Clara knew for certain was this: he had meant to do exactly what he did. She just didn't know why yet. The well was on the far east corner of the property. Clara had passed it her whole childhood without ever paying it much attention. It was old. Her father had told her it had been dug sometime in the early 1900s, back when the property still belonged to her great-great-grandfather. At some point in the 1970s, long before Clara was born, it had run dry. Now Raymond had capped it with a heavy iron lid, bolted down, and left it alone. In 40 years, nobody had opened it. Clara drove out to the property on a Tuesday morning in late March. The grass was still brown from winter. The air smelled like cold mud and cedar. Her brothers had already started clearing their share of the land, and she could hear a chainsaw running somewhere behind the tree line. She parked at the edge of the eastern field and walked toward the well. It looked smaller than she remembered. Stone-rimmed, maybe 3 feet across at the opening, the iron cap sitting on top like a rusted crown. She put her hands on the lid and pushed. Nothing. She pushed harder. Still nothing. The bolts were rusted nearly solid. She went back to her car, got the crowbar from the trunk, and went to work. It took her almost 40 minutes. Her palms were bleeding a little by the time the lid finally groaned and gave way. She leaned over the opening and looked down. Dark, cold air rising up like breath. And then, faint, unmistakable, the smell of machine oil. She stood up straight. Machine oil, in a dry well that hadn't been opened in 40 years. She looked around the empty field. Her brother's chainsaw was still running. Nobody was watching. She went back to her car and got her flashlight. The beam of light cut down into the darkness, and what she saw didn't make sense. Not at first. The well was about 20 feet deep. At the bottom, she could see the stone floor, dry, just like her father had always said. But pressed against the south-facing wall, barely visible in the shadows, was something that had no business being down there. A wooden shelf, rough cut but solid, and on it, wrapped in oil-treated canvas, several long, narrow bundles. She counted them in the flashlight beam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her heart was doing something it had never done before. Not racing exactly. More like pausing. Like her body was trying to make sure her brain caught up before it was allowed to continue. She called her friend Deborah, who was the only person she trusted completely. "I need you to come out to the property," she said. "Right now?" "Right now." "Clara, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, still staring down into the dark. I need a second person. And I need you to bring rope." Deborah arrived 20 minutes later with a coil of climbing rope she'd borrowed from her husband and an expression that said she had about 100 questions, but was smart enough to ask none of them yet. Clara had been sitting at the edge of the well the whole time, just sitting, thinking about her father, about the way he used to walk the property every evening after dinner, always going east, always toward that corner of the field. She had assumed he was just checking the fence line. She had assumed. They tied the rope to the bumper of Deborah's truck, and Clara went down. Hand over hand, feet braced against the stone wall, the flashlight wedged into her jacket pocket and angled upward so she could see. The air got colder fast. It smelled like iron and oil, and something older underneath that, damp earth and time. When her feet touched the stone floor, she stood still for a moment. Let her eyes adjust. The shelf was right there. Up close, she could see it wasn't roughly made at all. It was carefully made. Dowels, not nails. The wood was treated with something, linseed oil maybe, to protect it from moisture. And the bundles on the shelf were wrapped with a precision that was instantly, unmistakably familiar. Her father's precision. She reached for the closest one with hands that had stopped shaking, somewhere between the top of the well and the bottom. The canvas unrolled slowly. Inside was a vacuum-sealed bag, the kind you use to store food. Inside the bag, stacked in even rows, were $100 bills. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat down on the stone floor of a dry well, 20 feet underground, and she laughed. Because of course her father had done this. Of course. She opened all 5 bundles. Each one was the same, vacuum-sealed, moisture-protected, stacked with the careful efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years thinking about what happened to things that got left out in the weather. She counted later at Deborah's kitchen table, with the bundles spread across the linoleum and both of them barely breathing. $87,000. Cash, hidden in a sealed, worthless dry well that nobody wanted, left specifically and deliberately to the one child Raymond Mendenhall trusted completely. But that was only the first layer of the mystery. Because when Clara went back the next morning, alone this time, and in the early gray light before her brothers woke up, she found something she had missed the first time. At the back of the shelf, tucked flat against the stone wall, was a green notebook, exactly like the ones in the back bedroom. She brought it up, sat in the dead grass with the morning cold soaking through her jeans, and opened it. Her father's handwriting filled every page. Raymond Mendenhall had started writing in that notebook in 1987. Clara was not yet born. His marriage was not yet in trouble. The farm was struggling but surviving, and he had made a decision. He wrote it plainly, in the same plain hand he used to write grocery lists. If any of my children are ever left with nothing, I want them to have something. Not my brother's children, not the government. Yes, mine. He had been saving in cash since he was 26 years old. Every year, a portion of whatever came in, crop money, repair work, the occasional timber sale, went into a separate envelope in a separate place. He never put it in a bank. He had watched his own father lose everything in a bad loan. He didn't trust banks. He didn't trust paper trails. He trusted stone walls and iron lids, and the kind of silence that only a dry well at the far edge of your property can give you. He wrote about each year, the good ones and the terrible ones. The year the corn failed completely. The year he sold 2 acres to keep the power on. The year Clara's mother left and he sat at the kitchen table for 4 days without speaking. Through all of it, the well grew, quietly, steadily, the way her father did everything. But the notebook didn't just contain accounting. Halfway through, something shifted. His handwriting changed. Still the same letters, but closer together, the pen pressing harder. He wrote about Clara's brothers. He wrote carefully, without cruelty, but clearly. He had watched them for 30 years and he had learned things. That the oldest, Marcus, had borrowed money from 2 different neighbors and never paid either one back. That the middle one, Patrick, had sold a piece of equipment that wasn't his to sell and pocketed the difference and said nothing. He wrote, I love my sons, but love is not the same as trust, and trust is what this is about. And then, 1 page later, he wrote about Clara. What he wrote about the time she was 19 and he had a bad winter and couldn't make the property tax payment, and she had given him her entire savings. $400 she'd made working at the gas station, without him asking and without mentioning it again. He wrote about the time, years later, when she had driven 3 hours through an ice storm, because he had a fever and no one else came. He wrote, "She has never once thought about what she was getting. That's why she gets everything." He meant the well. He meant $87,000 in vacuum-sealed hundreds. He meant 30 years of silent, private devotion from a man who didn't say things out loud. And he meant one more thing. Because on the very last page of the notebook, in handwriting that was shakier than the rest, written clearly not long before he died, there was an address, a lawyer's office, not the one who had handled the will, a different one in Nashville. And beneath it, 3 words: ask about the deed. Clara sat in that field for a long time. The sun came up while she was reading. She heard her brother Marcus's truck start somewhere on the other side of the property. She folded the notebook carefully, put it inside her jacket, and drove to Nashville. The lawyer's name was Helen Chu. She was in her 50s, precise and unhurried, and when Clara sat down across from her desk and said her father's name, something moved across Helen's face. Not surprise, recognition. She had been waiting. Raymond Mendenhall had visited her office 14 months before he died. He had made arrangements. The $15,000 valuation on the well, the one that had made everyone in that room feel sorry for Clara, was a valuation of the land beneath it, a surface valuation. What it did not include, because Raymond had made sure it wasn't disclosed in the probate documents, was a secondary deed, a mineral rights deed. A geologist had surveyed that corner of the property in 2019 at Raymond's request. The well was dry, but the ground beneath it was not. There was a substantial natural gas deposit running under the east corner of that property. Conservative estimates put it at somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 in extraction value. The mineral rights belonged to whoever held the deed to the well. That deed now belonged to Clara. It took almost a year to fully process. Lawyers, assessments. In negotiations with an energy company that had been quietly aware of that deposit for some time and was very interested in talking. Clara kept working at the library through all of it. She didn't tell her brothers what she'd found. She didn't tell anyone except Deborah and Helen Chu. When the final number came through, when the check was real and the ink was dry, and Helen Chu set it on the desk in front of her, Clara looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she asked if she could use the office phone. She called the 2 neighbors her brother Marcus had never paid back. She paid both debts in full. She paid for the headstone her family had been putting off, ordering for her father's grave. She bought herself nothing for 3 months. And then, one morning in October, nearly 7 months after she had first pressed that crowbar against a rusted iron lid in a cold field in Tennessee, she drove back out to the property. The east corner was quiet. The well was still there. She sat on the stone rim the way she used to sit on the porch railing as a little girl, watching her father walk this same field in the late afternoon light, heading east, always east. She understood now. Every evening, every single evening. He had been walking to check on her. Not on the well, on her, on the thing he was building for her, quietly in the dark, over decades, while the rest of the world assumed it was nothing but a dry hole in a corner of a field nobody wanted. Her brothers found out eventually, Marcus through a neighbor, Patrick through Marcus. There were phone calls, there were accusations. Patrick used the word manipulation. Marcus hired a lawyer who found nothing actionable and sent a letter that Helen Chu replied to in 4 sentences. Clara never responded directly to either of them. She had read that notebook cover to cover 6 times by then. She knew what her father thought of what they would say. He had written it plainly on page 41. Noise is what people make when they have no argument left. Let them make it. The stone doesn't answer the rain. She still works at the library, not because she has to. She just likes it. She likes the quiet. She likes that people come in looking for something and leave having found it. Her father would have understood that. He spent 40 years hiding something in the dark so that one day, one specific person would go looking and find it. Not because she was the smartest, not because she was the eldest, but because she was the one who showed up. She was the one who came in the ice storm. She was the one who gave $400 without being asked. She was the one who, when everyone else saw a dry well worth nothing, went and got a crowbar. There's an old saying that a man reveals his true character not in what he says, but in what he plans for when he's no longer there to speak. Raymond Mendenhall never said the word love easily. His daughter knew that. She had grown up knowing it the way you know cold weather. Not from being told, but from feeling it. But he had spent 30 years building something in the dark, tending it, protecting it, choosing her. And when he was gone and the room was quiet and the lawyer slid the deed across the table, and her brothers got the house and the land and the truck and the bank accounts, he gave her the one thing that looked like nothing, the one thing no one would fight over, the one thing only she would understand enough to open. $87,000 in cash, mineral rights worth $500,000 more, and a green notebook that said, in plain handwriting, on a page near the end, "She has never once thought about what she was getting. That's why she gets everything." They thought her father had left her the short end, but he had spent 30 years making sure that when the moment came, she would be the only one holding the key.